Savior, conqueror, hero, villain. Let's talk about a legendary tale of redemption.
How you get so big that you food of this kind?
Hello and welcome into the third video in the Redemption in a Star Wars Context series that we have going on here at the Star Wars Refuge. If you haven't caught the series from the beginning, I highly recommend you start by clicking here. It will basically it'll take you back to an introduction video that we have that will just break down how I'm approaching the topic and what I'm trying to do. But today I'm going to do our first profile video of a specific case of redemption within Star Wars. I am starting with a legend story, but it's a story that I think a lot of people know. Fair warning, I'm going to do a lot of spoiling of a video game that is now over 15 years old called Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. It is one of my favorite video games of all time, and if you haven't played it, I highly recommend you stop watching this video and go play it for yourself and then come back, because as amazing as it is, it's even more amazing if you don't know what happens in it before you play it. But if you do know what happens, or you don't care and you want to join me for this video anyway, we're going to go ahead and get into the topic. The topic is, of course, the redemption of Revan, or Darth Revan, and as a side to it, the redemption of Bastila Shan. These are two characters from Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, and their story is one that is very personal for a lot of Star Wars fans. As I said with a lot of spoilers, what the player of the game finds out is after several dozen hours of gameplay, after hunting down the apprentice of the long-thought-dead Darth Revan, you find out that you yourself are Darth Revan. This moment quite literally changed me as a person and changed the way that I view Star Wars. Really, this moment was kind of my version of "No, I am your father." I'm not really here to talk to you today about why this is the best Star Wars game that they've made to date. I'm here to talk to you specifically about Revan's story. Before I continue, I want to lay down some kind of context, some understanding about what we're going to be talking about. I did say earlier that this story is in what's considered Legends canon. So this story does not necessarily tie into the current Disney era canon that we are seeing with the movies today. However, it does fit within its own canon that is the Legends Star Wars universe. Now, one of the most popular things about the game is you could make choices, and these choices affected how the story would go and what would happen to the other characters in the game. And in fact, there are two different possible endings based on these choices that you had. But the story of the game did have to fit into the canon of the time. Therefore, there are correct story choices. I'm going to be talking about Revan in this video in the context of the canon Revan, or the Legends canon Revan, which means male Revan, who was redeemed and ended the game as a lightsider, and a character that fell in love with the character of Bastila Shan, who also ended the game redeemed. So those are four things I'm going to be talking about. If when you play the game, you did not play down that particular story path, that's totally fine. The choices are there in the game for a reason, but those are the canon ways that the game went on, and that's the context that I'm going to be discussing the character in the video today. One of the reasons I'm really excited to talk about Revan and Bastila in the kind of Star Wars redemptive context is because, ironically, their game is a big reason that some of the ideas of the dark and light side of the Force and the ideas of redemption are kind of messed up. This game had a morality system. As you played, you'd get light side points, you'd get dark side points. It would determine your alignment within the game, the story options that were presented for you, even your appearance. As you played dark side, you would become more and more like grizzled looking. And as a result, I think a lot of people kind of see the light and dark side in that way, that it's this scale, and you ultimately end up on the light side if you did 50 light side things and only did 8 dark side things, which is definitely how the game mechanics work, but not necessarily what the theme of the game means. I suppose there's a point where you have to separate out what the game is saying for the story and understand what is just a game mechanic. In the same way that the Force is not really a slider bar, you also can't carry around 50 swords and 8 mines and 20 sets of armor like you would see in the game. But enough of the slow burn kind of context building up to this point. Let's talk about the game itself. In the game, the player is Revan. Player doesn't know that the player is Revan. The character of Revan does not know that he is Revan. I'll start referring to Revan as himself and not the player from this point on. Revan thinks that the person, the historical figure that was Darth Revan, was killed by his apprentice, Darth Malak, or as some stories say, that Bastila Shan killed him, that there's these kind of two conflicting ideas. What actually happened was Malak did turn on his master, and Revan almost died. Bastila took Revan back to the Jedi, and they erased his memory and put in a new identity, and they were hoping that the new identity would be dominant over the old identity, but that the old identity would still kind of subconsciously be there, and they could use Revan to subvert Malak, basically win the war that Malak was currently waging on the Republic, which is, honestly, to be blunt, really screwed up. Now, Revan knows that the historical figure of Revan used to be a Jedi and had fallen to the dark side, and these are all things that kind of get revealed over the course of the game. Revan is a companion, basically, to this Bastila Shan, who's a rising star in the Jedi Order, and he thinks he's there to help her, rescue her, protect her, depending on what point in the game you're talking about. Throughout the majority of the game, even if one is playing light side, I don't think the redemption arc has started. See, Revan doesn't know Revan is Revan. Revan does not know that he has anything he needs to be forgiven of, anything he needs to forgive. He doesn't know that there's anything he has to make good on. He is this literal new person because someone has reprogrammed his mind. To me, all of the good deeds he's doing, they really don't move towards atonement for any of his crimes, and they don't prove redemption, which is a change of heart. I mean, yes, technically his heart has been changed, but it's been forcibly changed. It's almost the same as a dark side possession. It's a light side mind wipe. It's not a choosing to change one's heart and choosing good. It's having good forced upon yourself, and that's an entirely different animal. So to me, Revan's redemption arc doesn't happen until about 2/3 of the way through the game on a level that's referred to as the Leviathan. So in the game, most of the way through, Darth Malak finds Revan, his old master, and you get kidnapped, Bastila gets kidnapped, your whole crew gets kidnapped, and at this point you find out that Malak has destroyed the Jedi Temple where you trained. So any Jedi Masters that you had at this point, they were kind of reteaching you the Force, and had also been lying to you for the entirety of the game, are now presumably dead and buried in a pile of rubble. And Bastila is there with you. You two are like the only surviving Jedi of this particular kind of subgroup of Jedi from the planet of Dantooine. When Revan goes to escape, Malak confronts him and reveals his true identity. It's very much like the "no, I am your father." It's, hey, you're actually the biggest, scariest, meanest, most evilest Sith Lord in the entire galaxy, and the Jedi never told you. Again, if you're playing as a male Jedi, typically, one would be exploring the romance plotline between Revan and Bastila. It is canonical that they had a romance plotline. So Revan just found out that the woman he's been falling in love with reprogrammed his memory and has been lying to him this whole time. So it's a really, really big deal. Bastila, who is now kind of guilt-stricken, throws herself at Darth Malak and sacrifices herself by distracting him. Then Revan and everybody else can get away. And this is the point, I think, where Revan's redemption arc begins. This is the point where Revan knows who he is, knows what he's done, knows what's been done to him, and has to start making a choice. This is also where Bastila's descent starts. So again, in the game, Bastila falls to the dark side. Now, she doesn't fall to the dark side through a traditional means. She falls to the dark side because Malak captures her, and there's a cutscene of him torturing her, and you think that he just wants to torture her until she gives in and joins him so the pain stops, and he's like, no, that's not what I'm actually doing. I'm going to torture you so that you can see how powerful the dark side is, so that you want it, and that's how he ultimately corrupts her. Revan could learn that he's the Dark Lord, learn that he had all this dark side potential, that he was so powerful that he almost defeated the entire galaxy, and he could fall back into his old Sith ways, or he could defeat Darth Malak and save the very Republic that he was trying to conquer just a couple of years earlier. This is why I think his redemption path starts. Because all at once, Revan has to deal with the guilt of everything he's ever done, and he would still have the memories of the imprinted identity. So what you now have is the memories of the entirety of the game from the imprinted personality that are now having to deal with the memories of the years prior from this evil person. And so this good person has to deal with all of these bad, horrible, evil things that he's done. But this good person is also dealing with the betrayal of the Jedi Order that lied to him. And not only lied to him, but lied to him for the purpose of using him. Like, they didn't put a memory into him in order to turn him good. They didn't have that altruistic reason. They did it so they could use him to find Malak's base, basically. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but if you've played the game, you know what it is, and if you haven't played the game, it's not important enough to spell it out. But they're using Revan to find Malak's evil things. So not only is he dealing with the guilt, but he's dealing with the mental... I mean, is abuse too strong of a word when you're talking about ripping someone's personality out and putting a different personality in for your own purposes? I don't know. So you have these intense, painful feelings of betrayal. Remember, one of the people that did this to him is the woman he loves, and he has that coupled with guilt. And these are two very dark emotions and negative emotions that would be so easy to pull him to the dark side. But canonical Revan moves past these. You know, he finds solace in the companions he still has, and even if he hasn't fully forgiven the specific Jedi Council that wronged him, he's forgiven the Jedi and the Republic enough that he seeks out Malak to stop Malak for the sake of the Republic. The player who plays the game Darkside goes to kill Malak for revenge. The player who plays Lightside goes to kill Malak to save the Republic. And so the canonical Revan is going not for revenge, but to stop Malak from taking over the galaxy. And this is the sign of at least moving towards redemption, is this idea of, I could hang on to these dark emotions that would give me power that I know I have access to. I now know that I can be that powerful, and I'm choosing to not be. I am choosing to let go of the pain instead of use the pain. And that's how we see Revan being this different person. And yes, Revan still has this pre-programmed identity, but even if you want to say that he has the identity the Jedi gave him now, and not the Sith Lord, he's still a person that is choosing to let go of that pain. In that case, he's not a guilty person at all who's been used, and choosing not to follow the pain, so he's making a good choice, but he is guilty. And as his memories come back and he remembers what he's done, those memories would seep into his current personality and change it. So it's one of those kind of big questions, like hard to answer philosophical questions, like if a person forgets their sins, can they be held accountable for them? What makes Revan interesting is he forgot his sins and then did ultimately remember them. But that to me is the pivotal turning point. And it's happening at the same time that Bastila is losing herself. So you have Revan, who is forgiving, letting go of things, and you have Bastila, who has always wanted power. Like I said, she was a rising star in the Jedi, could do things at a young age that Jedi Masters could not do because she had so much raw talent and ability. And now to see this kind of unbridled power that she could have at a moment that she's swelled with negative emotion, she's overcome with guilt for what she did to Revan. It hits her at the right time where it's easy for her to fall, and that's no shade on her. It'd be easy for anyone to fall. So this is the first point. The Leviathan, the first confrontation with Malak, is the first point and the critical point in the redemption of Revan and the fall of Bastila. The second of three very pivotal points is a confrontation between Revan and Bastila. So as you get to the very end of the game, you go to the kind of last planet before the final big bad headquarters of Darth Malak. You meet Bastila, and Bastila has now fully fallen to the dark side. In Legends canon, Bastila says, "We don't have to fight. You can join me, and you and I can kill Malak, and then we'll rule the galaxy." You know, the classic Sith offering. And it's at this point that in Legends canon, Revan says, "No, I'm going to stay a Jedi. I'm not going to join you in revenge. We're going to stop Malak, but we're going to stop Malak because Malak needs to be stopped." Bastila figures out she can't defeat Revan, so she runs away. This is where you see Revan is definitely on the path of redemption. You see him openly professing a change of heart, even though he hasn't really done anything to atone for anything yet, and continues on his path. We see Bastila now really on a dark descent, that she has fallen to the dark side, wants to turn on her master, and wants to kill Malak, not because Malak needs to be stopped, but she wants to kill Malak because she wants what Malak has. And then you get to the third and final confrontation between these two characters. And at this point, again, the story can go a couple different ways, but the canon way it goes is that a light side Revan speaks to Bastila and pulls her back from the dark side because of their love for each other. And she rejects the dark side. She stops helping Malak, and she uses her force powers to help the Republic in this big battle that's going on. And then Revan goes on to his final confrontation with Malak, and again, in that fight, instead of saying, I want to kill you for revenge, says, no, you fall into the dark, you're not able to come back, you refuse to come back, so you have to be stopped. Basically, you can argue that Revan was dark. Bastila pulled him back against his will, and that's how you get to the beginning of the game. And then you hit this critical point where Revan gets to decide if he finds out who he is and does he want to stay light or dark, and Bastila has to deal with what she's done. And here Revan moves to the light and Bastila moves to the dark. And then you have dark Bastila and light Revan, and Revan pulls Bastila back to the light, but not against her will, of her own choosing. And so it's this really beautiful kind of symbolic mirror image relationship that the two have going on. It's a really powerful game, like I said, if you haven't played it. For Revan, to me, the redemption is that he let go of all the ways that he was wronged. He would have every right to be really angry at the Republic and not want to help them, and instead, he goes and saves them and saves the Republic. You could argue the atonement would be all of the trials and tribulations he went through, at least since finding out that he was Revan, and there was still a fair amount of that to do in the game at that point, and then to defeat Malak. So you could argue he's atoned, you could argue that he's not, but atonement is different than redemption, and I'm here specifically to talk about redemption. But we very clearly see that Revan at the end of the game is a different person than the Revan that the Jedi took and mind-wiped. But I also think it's critical to point out that Revan did not become a good person because the Jedi formed him to be that good person. Maybe because of what the Jedi did, that might be the only reason why he was able to come back. Not that that really makes what they did okay, but ultimately Revan is making his own choices by the end of the game, and we see that he is a different person. And with Bastila, she has a redemption arc. It's much shorter, but it's also, she's also been on the dark side a much smaller amount of time, and you could argue that at some level her fall is due to abuse and even possession, even though the game does make it seem as though it's very much her own choices. And we see that because she does start trying to atone for what she's done. After fighting against the Republic, she starts fighting for the Republic and saves many Republic lives in the process. Now, what I do want to talk about here is a big part of why Revan chose to stay on the path of the light after he learned what he learned, and a big part of why Bastila was able to come back from the dark is their love story. If you watch the prequel trilogy, you would be told that, love stories for Jedi don't work out. Never mind just the Jedi rules. Anakin's love for Padme, which turned into his possession of Padme, is ultimately what led him to the dark side. But here we see a romantic love relationship that helped these two characters, and I kind of want to talk very briefly as to why. In a way, the story of Revan and Bastila is the opposite of Anakin and Padme, and not just because, in this case, Bastila doesn't die. Anakin has these intense worries about losing Padme, and that he's often separated from Padme, and he's trying to find powers to protect her. Revan and Bastila have a very different relationship because they're both Force sensitive. They both would understand kind of the push and pull that one would feel from the Force, which would give them a better understanding of each other. I think at the end of the day, the reason why Bastila and Revan's relationship worked and helped them, and Anakin and Padme's relationship didn't work and didn't help them, is, kind of hate to say it, the health of the relationship. What Revan and Bastila had, other than, Bastila's intense lie that she keeps from him, but then she does try to make up for. Other than that, they're two people kind of living their lives, where when you go to Anakin and Padme, while I do think they had real feelings for each other, Anakin was using Padme to fill a void in his life. And he had a lot of possession issues, and his particular path made their relationship a tragedy, where the type of people that Revan and Bastila are and the type of relationship they had is what saved them from tragedy. And I think that these two relationships in context of each other are very important, because absolutely love is a very real thing, and it is a very pure thing, and it is something that can save us, and it is a large part of where forgiveness and, as a result, redemption can come from. Because Bastila and Revan loved each other, they could see past the pain that the one caused the other. But love can also be tainted and turned into something that's not helpful, and that's the part that the Jedi feared. And so I really like looking at these relationships together, because I like that there's not one answer, that it is not a romantic relationship intrinsically saves everybody, but it's also not that a romantic relationship intrinsically ruins everybody, that there is still kind of this freedom in how relationships work between people that exist in real life, and that translates into the Force, and that not all the relationships work the same way. But now I'm also kind of tangenting, and I apologize for that. That was just something that was big enough that I felt it needed to be addressed. So I suppose if I were to do a big, too long, didn't watch kind of summary at the end of this video, which I don't know that anybody would actually go to the end of the video to find, but that's okay. What I would say, ultimately, the story of Revan's redemption is somebody who kind of became evil because he was impulsive and didn't want to listen to anybody else and wanted to go and do his own fight and didn't have the patience to do the fight the right way, and went out and found himself corrupted. That character became a person who was used and abused and betrayed and forgave and loved. And you could find love, and true love takes patience. And you really saw this character transform into someone else. And then you have Bastila, who was impulsive and did want power, even if she didn't necessarily want to admit that to herself, who let that go again in the name of love. And that's how these characters kind of worked. And that's how their particular redemption expressed itself. Now, because both of them lived, they would both go on to have a lot of time for atonement. If you're interested, their stories did continue. You hear a little bit about it in The Old Republic, The Sith Lords. You can read a lot about it in the novel The Old Republic, Revan by Drew Karpyshyn, and Revan's story is ultimately concluded as well in The Old Republic MMO. I know there's a lot more to Revan, and there's a lot more I could talk about with redemption and atonement and where Revan goes and all of that, but this video is going to be big enough in of its own right just talking about Knights of the Old Republic, so I apologize if I didn't hit on a point that you really wanted to. While we're here, if you are interested in Knights of the Old Republic, I would direct you, one, to check out this playlist, which is the streams of me playing the non-canon dark side version of the game for the first time. I had played the game like 12 times on the light side, and I was finally forced to play it on the dark side, and I think you might enjoy that a lot. I would also direct you to read in the description an interview we did with a fellow by the name of Alex Kane. Now, Alex Kane wrote a really fantastic book on the making of Knights of the Old Republic. It's just called Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. It's by Boss Fight Books. I highly recommend you check out the book because it was phenomenal, and find Alex on Twitter because he's become a really cool dude in the Star Wars fandom, and he always seems up for talking to people. So those would be kind of my two shout outs at the end of the video. These videos have been coming out further apart than I really wanted them to, but eventually I will do another profile video in this series. Let me know in the comments who you'd like to hear me talk about, what redemption story you'd like to hear me say, and I'd love to know what your thoughts are on Revan and Bastila's story. Please follow us on all of the socials if you're not already, and until next time, keep it real and fly casual.
Cooking can be fun.